The Defenders Academy. Bringing the church outside of a building. Studying the evidence of our faith. Being prepared with a defense and being intentional in our relationships. Because you might be the only Bible that some people ever read.
I wasn't raised in a Christian household. Both my parents were, but I wasn't. They never went to church. We never talked about religion. We never talked about God. I went my entire childhood not having any idea what my parents believed on the topic. So that's actually because I did grow up in a loving household where my parents did a great deal to provide for my sister and I. It led to an open opportunity to study religion and to follow the evidence where it led. And that's exactly what I ended up doing when I was a teenager. When I was 16, I did a program called Running Start, which got me to college at 16. So I was going to community college. And that's when I started really studying and trying to figure out how to make sense of the world. This led me to the field of Christian apologetics, which you can say that apologetics is the historical, scientific, and logical defense of Christianity. It comes from 1 Peter 3:15, where we're told that we should always be prepared with a defense for our faith. The word defense is Greek apologos, which is where we get the word apologetic from. And so I started studying the secular evidence that proved Christianity, and that was what Christ used to bring me home. That's how I came to accept Christ, was by following the evidence where it led and realizing there's only one worldview that holds water. And what's wild to me is knowing that the evidence points to Christianity. Today, when you look at the data, when you look at the stats, 75% of Christians who go to college leave as non-believers, which is staggering. And I think I have an idea as to why. This is actually the crux. This is why the Defenders Academy exists. It's to speak to college and high school age students about the evidence for Christianity. Because here's what's happening. When we get to be around preteens, typically, we start questioning the world around us. We start thinking things don't make sense. We start looking for answers, and we start asking really hard questions. And for so many of us who did grow up in the church, remember I didn't, but for so many who do, you start asking questions at the age of 12 and not getting very good answers and getting non-answers. And sometimes some churches even tell people not to ask questions at all. And you start to develop this mindset that there aren't good answers to these questions. And then you go off to university. And university is a place that is designed to challenge beliefs. So you start being asked these questions that you never got answers to by your professors and by your peers. One or two tough questions that you don't know the answer to aren't enough to break a worldview. But we're talking about 4 years. And then by the time they graduate college at the age of 22, we're actually talking about a decade. We're talking about almost half their life, half their conscious life of questions without good answers. And the sad reality is that there are good answers to these questions. It's like there's no good evidence for God. Do you really believe that? Often you'll find that just giving a list of the evidences without even explaining them is quite compelling. We can say pretty easily that God is the best explanation for either something rather than nothing. God's the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. God's the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe. God's the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and duties in the world. God's the best explanation for the applicability of mathematics to the physical world. God's the best explanation for the existence of conscious minds. God is the best explanation for the historical facts surrounding the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And above all of that, on top of all these arguments, the existence of God is something that is readily available and can be experienced by those who want it. So, there are good evidences for the existence of God. Did Jesus really say that you can't be gay? That's a really good question. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in Jesus Christ? Do you think that he is the incarnated God of the universe? Well, no, of course not. Okay, then I'm gonna say that it doesn't even matter what Jesus said. What matters is who Jesus was. So we need to figure out who Jesus was, and then we can talk about what Jesus said. But right now, if Jesus was just a random man, what's it matter what he said? This is actually the philosophy of what I call Socratic apologetics. Right? The Socratic method is a teaching tool where you don't answer questions, but instead you ask questions back. And when you start doing this to aggressive opposition on conversations about religion and theology and philosophy, you don't have to know all the answers. Instead, you can turn the tables on them and you can ask them tough questions, and then they'll start to realize that they don't know the answers either. And then you can have some camaraderie in that, and you can move forward together in your pursuit of honest truth. And the good news is that only the truth stands up to scrutiny, which means as believers of the truth, Christians have nothing to worry about.